This is one of the smallest kitchens on Earth. A volcanic rock in the North Atlantic, with more sheep than people, and almost nobody in it. 320,000 souls. A town, really, pretending to be a country. And for about 5 years, this town of fishermen ran one of the most powerful banks on the planet. Its bankers bought up half of Europe. Everyone said they were geniuses. And then, over one long weekend in October 2008, all of it went up in flames. Every bank, the currency, the whole miracle. It was the biggest banking collapse relative to its size that any country has ever had. But here's what makes Iceland different from every other kitchen we've ever cooked. When it all burned down, they didn't put the fire out. They let it burn. And it might have been the smartest thing anyone did. Start with the island itself. Iceland sits just below the Arctic Circle, on the crack between two continents, where the Earth is so alive that heat and water come straight out of the ground for free. Nearly all of its power is clean. Volcanoes and rivers bottled. For most of its history, this was a poor, hard place that lived on one thing: fish. Cod built Iceland, and the people were tough, quiet, and almost impossibly small in number. Fewer than you'd find in a single neighborhood of Tokyo, scattered across an island the size of a country. And by the early 2000s, they had quietly become one of the richest, happiest, longest-living peoples on Earth. A tiny, trusting kitchen where everyone knew everyone, the water was hot, and nothing ever really went wrong. Which is exactly the kind of kitchen where someone decides to try something bold. Because being rich and safe was no longer enough. This little fishing nation looked at its quiet life and decided it wanted to cook on a much, much bigger stove. Today on Salted Earth, Iceland, the smallest kitchen that ever tried to feed the whole world. And the wildest recipe anyone has ever written down. And like every country, it has one secret ingredient. Iceland's stays blank for now. We'll fill it in at the end. And it is not what you think. It started in 2003. Iceland took its sleepy, state-owned banks and handed them to private owners. And those new owners had an idea so bold, it was almost beautiful. Why stay a fishing nation when you could become a bank? 3 banks, called KOWP Thing, Landsbanki, and Glitnir, went out into the world and started buying everything. Shops in London, football clubs, airlines, whole companies all across Europe, all on borrowed money. At home they called these men the Outvasian Vikings, modern raiders, conquering with cash instead of swords. And the whole country was proud of them. And the money washed over everyone. Ordinary people borrowed too. For the bigger house, the new car, the good life. Often in foreign money, because it was cheaper. Household debt climbed to more than the entire country earned in a year. The whole island was running on credit. But the fire felt warm, so nobody asked where the fuel was coming from. And here is the number that should have stopped everyone cold. In 2003, those banks were ordinary. Within 5 years, they had grown until they held more than 10 times everything the entire country produced in a year. Read that again. 3 banks, from a town of 300,000 people, had become 10 times bigger than the nation underneath them. Their debts to the outside world went from a modest fraction of the economy to 7 times the size of it. A kitchen the size of a closet was now cooking for the entire planet, on a stove it had no way to turn off. It only worked as long as the money kept flowing in. And in 2008, somewhere far away, the money stopped. When the global financial crisis hit, the world's lenders wanted their money back. And a kitchen that owes 10 times what it earns has nothing to give them. The fuel was cut, And the fire, the whole glittering fire, began to collapse in on itself. What happened next took just 1 week. The 6th of October, emergency law, the government bracing the nation for impact. The 7th, the second biggest bank, gone, seized by the state. The 9th, the biggest of them all, gone. In the space of a few days, almost the entire banking system of a country simply ceased to exist. The currency, the krona, fell off a cliff. It lost so much value the country could barely buy the food and fuel it imported. The stock market, when they finally dared to reopen it, had lost more than 90%. Trillions in paper wealth for a nation this size, gone in a long, sickening weekend. And then it got personal. Those banks had taken savings from hundreds of thousands of ordinary British and Dutch people through online accounts called Iceland. When the banks fell, that money was frozen. And to claw it back, the British government reached for a law it had on the books. Its anti-terrorism law. The same legal weapon meant for terrorists was used to freeze the assets of a tiny, peaceful island of fishermen. Iceland was, officially, listed alongside terror groups. The Prime Minister called it what it was, completely unfriendly and absurd. And the people answered in the most Icelandic way imaginable. Tens of thousands of them, a quarter of the entire country, put their faces online under 3 words. We are not terrorists. The smallest kitchen on Earth had just blown up and been called a monster for it. But this is where Iceland stops being a story about banks and becomes a story about people. Because the families who lost their savings, their homes, their futures, they did not stay quiet. Every week, through a freezing northern winter, they gathered outside the parliament in Reykjavik, and they brought something from home. They brought their pots, their pans, their kitchen spoons, and they banged them night after night until the noise was deafening. The press gave it a name that fits this channel almost too perfectly: the Kitchenware Revolution. Real families, holding up the tools they cook with, demanding to know who had burned down their kitchen. The point they were making was simple and furious. We are not bankers. We are not gamblers. We are the people who actually cook in this kitchen, and you set it on fire with our savings. And the noise worked. In January 2009, the Prime Minister and his entire government did something that almost never happens. They resigned. The pots and pans brought down the government. And then came the hardest question of all. The world said, your bankers borrowed it, so your people must pay it back. Every last pound, for years. And here, this tiny country did something almost no nation in history has done. They put it to a vote. Twice. And both times, by enormous margins. The first time, more than 9 in 10. The people of Iceland looked at a bill run up by private bankers and said simply, no. We will not starve our own table to pay for their feast. Now, every other country in the crisis did the same thing. When their banks caught fire, they rushed in with the public's money and tried to save them. Look at Ireland. It guaranteed its banks completely and handed the bill to its people. It cost Irish taxpayers tens of billions and turned a banking fire into a decade-long debt nightmare. Iceland did the opposite. It looked at the burning banks and made a cold, brave decision. Let them burn. The government refused to pour the nation's savings into saving private banks that had gambled and lost. It protected ordinary people's everyday deposits at home and let the reckless foreign empire collapse into ash. You broke it, you own it. The country would not die to save the bankers who nearly killed it. And then Iceland did the thing the whole world only ever dreams about. It put its bankers on trial. Not symbolically, for real. Special prosecutors spent years digging through the wreckage, and in the end, the men at the very top went to prison. The chief executive of the country's biggest bank, its chairman. Real cells, real sentences. In most of the world, the people who burn down the kitchen get a bonus. In Iceland, they got a cell. So a country that the entire world had written off as finished got up off the floor. It was painful. A hard fall. Jobs lost. Years of careful repair. Money held inside the country by strict controls that did not fully lift until 2017. There was no magic. Just a small, stubborn people cleaning up a mess. And then the strangest rescue in the world arrived. In 2010, a volcano with a name no one outside Iceland could pronounce, Eyjafjallajökull, erupted and grounded flights across Europe, and suddenly the whole planet was looking at this island. People didn't see a disaster. They saw glaciers and steam and black sand, and they wanted to come. Tourism exploded. The land itself, the fire and ice that had always been free, quietly paid the country back. Within about 9 years, Iceland had earned back everything it lost. The kitchen that the world set on fire and called a terrorist was open again. Warm, full, and standing on its own terms. And that secret ingredient we left blank? It was never the fish, or the clean power, or the genius of the bankers. It was the one thing almost no other kitchen has the stomach for: accountability. The simple, brutal idea that the people who burn the kitchen down should be the ones who pay, not the families who were only ever trying to eat. Because every country on earth eventually has a fire in the kitchen. The only real question is, who gets handed the bill? And a tiny island of fishermen of all places gave the clearest answer anyone ever has. Not us. Not the people. Send it to the ones who lit the match. That's Iceland, the smallest kitchen that ever caught fire, and the only one brave enough to let it burn. There's a place for you at this table, on this search for the soul of the world. Subscribe. The next recipe is already on the stove. Next time, the fastest kitchen the world has ever seen. 60 years ago, this was one of the poorest countries on Earth. Today, it sets a table the whole planet copies. The music, the phones, the food, the films. Nobody has ever cooked a feast this good, this fast. So why does almost no one in this kitchen seem to be enjoying the meal?